In the early 1882nd, a sudden blizzard swept across the wild lands of Montana. The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it swirling white snow and the bone-chilling cold of a harsh winter. A woman with a bruised face, a torn dress, and swollen eyes stumbled off the train and collapsed onto the station platform. The station master, an older man with a graying mustache, saw her and recoiled in fear. "You look like a woman who ran from hell," he said with a trembling voice. But she didn't answer, only let out a faint groan before passing out. He stood rooted to the spot, hesitant to offer help. This was, after all, still the Wild West. The station master had seen people beaten before, but never a woman so thoroughly broken. A cowboy named Jacob Stone was leaning against a wooden fence, patiently waiting for a shipment of barbed wire that was 2 days late. He saw her fall and quickly ran to her. He gently lifted her, and though she was quite thin, he felt like he was holding a corpse. Her skin was icy cold, her breath shallow, but she was still alive. "Where's the doctor?" Jacob asked the station master, his voice sharp. "The town's 4 miles away, that's the nearest doctor." Jacob didn't hesitate. "I'll take her." He didn't ask for permission. He carried her to his mare, carefully placed her in front of the saddle, and galloped hard toward town. The cold wind bit at his face, and Jacob ducked his head low to shield her from the biting cold. He could feel the trembling that ran through her body, not just from the cold, but from fear. Jacob's heart ached. He had seen her eyes before she fainted, a raw, empty terror he had never witnessed on any face. It wasn't the fear of someone who had just been attacked. It was the fear of someone who had lived with it daily. On the way, she woke up for a moment, but then passed out again. Jacob felt her trembling and reassured her with a gentle voice. "Don't worry, you're safe now." The words were meant as much for himself as for her. Safe. He had spent a lifetime building safety. Safety for his ranch. Safety for his cattle. Safety for his mother. But the sense of safety he was promising this woman was entirely different. It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. When they arrived at Dr. Keller's clinic, the doctor, a large man with rough hands, quickly helped her down. "She's bruised all over, signs of a brutal beating," he said after examining her. He frowned as he checked her wounds. "These bruises aren't from a fall. She's been struck by someone." Jacob stood outside the room, quietly watching. He didn't leave. He wanted to know what had happened to this woman. He had seen the despair on her face, and it was something he couldn't ignore. Dr. Keller told him she needed rest, food, and time to recover. Throughout the night, Jacob sat in a wooden chair in the hallway, occasionally hearing faint groans from inside. He thought about what the doctor had said. A simmering anger rose in his chest. He didn't know this woman, but the thought of another man inflicting these wounds made his blood boil. He had lived a simple life, one of hard work and keeping his word. To him, a man's honor wasn't in his strength, but in how he treated those weaker than himself. The next morning when she woke up, Jacob was sitting beside the bed with a cup of hot tea. "Good morning," he said. She flinched, her eyes full of fear. She recoiled, hiding her hands beneath the blanket. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "You fainted at the station. I brought you here." She didn't say anything, just stared at him. Those eyes had grown used to darkness and violence, and now the soft morning light and the presence of a strange man frightened her. "My name is Jacob Stone. I'm a cowboy, and I live on a cattle ranch west of town," he said, trying to keep his voice calm and gentle. "What's your name?" She looked down at her trembling hands, then whispered, "Adeline." "Adeline what Kane?" "Well, Adeline Kane, are you hungry?" She nodded. Jacob stood up. "I'll get you something to eat." In the following days, Adeline didn't speak much. She only trusted Jacob, not letting anyone else get close, not even the doctor. Each time Dr. Keller came to check on her wounds, Adeline would shrink away, avoiding his gaze. She wouldn't talk to him, answering only Jacob with nods or shakes of her head. Jacob patiently took care of her. He brought her warm food and sat by her as she sipped soup. He said little, but he was always there for her, as steady as the mountains outside the window. He realized his presence, and undemanding presence, was the only thing she could accept. Adeline slowly began to come back to life. Initially, she ate very little, but then her body's hunger won over her fear. Her face slowly regained some color. She started sitting up in bed, her eyes gradually losing their emptiness, beginning to take in the world around her. On the 4th day, she was sitting up watching Jacob as he sat in a wingback chair reading a newspaper. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, catching dust motes dancing in the air. She watched him for a while, then her dry voice came out, almost a whisper. "Thank you." Jacob looked up. "You don't owe me anything." I didn't think anyone would help me," she said. Her voice was shaky, filled with a fragile vulnerability. Jacob didn't ask what she had been running from, but the bruises on her body gradually faded and her eyes began to regain some light. They were no longer the eyes of a cornered animal, but of a woman slowly finding her way back to life. On the 5th day, she broke down. "I had 2 children," she said, her voice choked. "Willa and Weston, they are 5 and 7. My husband took them away. He said I wasn't fit to be a mother, that he had money and I had nothing." Jacob sat still. He let her speak, not interrupting. Adeline's tears streamed down her face. "He beat me until I couldn't see straight, then told the court I was mentally unstable. I tried to take the kids and run, but he found me. I just managed to get on the train." "Did you call the sheriff?" She shook her head. "He has money friends. They don't believe women like me." Jacob clenched his fists. "You're not alone anymore, Adeline." She blinked. "Why do you care about me?" "Because I saw how you collapsed at the station. It was like you were carrying the whole world on your back. No one should have to live like that." She was silent for a long time, then said, "I don't want to run anymore." "Then don't," he said. "What if he finds me? Let him try." Days turned into weeks. Adeline moved into a small room above the feed store. Jacob often visited her, bringing her apples, books, and other small things. She began to laugh again. "You're not as tough as you look," she said, grinning. "And you're tougher than you think," he shot back. One evening as the sun was setting, she asked, "Why are you still here?" "Because I want to be," he said. "You don't even know me," she said. "I know enough," he said, taking her hand. She didn't pull away. From that night on, Jacob often held her hand. She never collapsed again. Whenever she stumbled, he was always there. The hot summer came and the valley was covered in a heavy heat. Adeline began to walk along the trails near the river. One morning she saw Jacob pulling a splinter from his hand. "Are you always this early?" she asked. "Only when the cattle don't need chasing." She sat down next to him. "Are you working less now?" "No, just earlier. It gives me time to think." "What are you thinking about?" "What comes next?" "I haven't allowed myself to think that far." He sat down next to her. "So I'll ask you straight. Are you still planning to run?" Adeline didn't answer right away. She drew a line in the dirt with the tip of her boot. "I don't want to, but I don't know what staying looks like." "It could look like a job at the school," Jacob said. "They need a woman to help the younger children. You could teach, you know how to listen. That's more important than you think." She flinched. "I don't know anything about teaching. You know how to listen. That's more important than most things." She pulled her knees up, resting her chin on them. "What if I can't get my children back?" "I don't have an answer for that," he said, "but I know you'll never stop trying." They sat in silence until the sun rose. When she stood up, she looked down at him. "I'll go see Miss Cartreat." He nodded and she walked away, her shoulders straighter than the day before. A week later, she started working at the school. The children were wary at first, but Adeline had a way of kneeling to their level and waiting, not pushing. By the end of the 2nd day, a little girl left a ribbon on her chair. That evening, she told Jacob about it as they shelled peas. "I used to braid Willa's hair with blue ribbons like that." Jacob was silent, just offering her another handful of pods. "I wrote a letter to the court in Kansas City," she said. "Did you use a different name?" "No, I used my real name. I don't know if they'll respond, but if I don't ask, they never will." He worked quietly beside her. "Have you ever thought about what you would do if you got them back?" She looked up at the sky where the first stars were appearing. "I would find a place with trees, something near water. Nothing big, just a place where they could run and not be afraid." Jacob looked at her and something unspoken but solid passed between them, a shared picture slowly forming. "I know a place like that," he said. "It has an old barn and a stream running through it." She turned to him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've also been thinking about what comes next." The silence between them shifted, no longer heavy but full. That night, as Jacob was saddling his horse, she touched his sleeve. "I'm glad you stayed," she said. He was silent for a moment, then said, "Me too." She let her hand fall and he rode off into the dark. Back in her room, she unfolded the letter she had written but not yet sent. She added a line at the bottom, folded it again, and this time she took it to the post office herself. By late July, the valley grasses had turned brown brittle under the heat. The river had thinned, flowing slowly between warm stones. One afternoon, she found Jacob in the blacksmith's yard, scraping rust from a broken gate. "I got a letter," she said. Her voice even. He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "From Kansas," she nodded. "They forwarded my petition to the county clerk. They said I need to appear in person to have my claim considered." He clenched his jaw, but only said, When 2 weeks. She crouched beside him, taking a sanding cloth and starting on the other hinge. I'll need someone to ride with me. He didn't answer right away. His eyes moved to her hands, now steady. The skin healed, though faint bruises still remained. Are you sure you want to go back there? I don't want to, she said. But I can't leave my children in his house. Not now that I'm stronger. He sat down, their knees almost touching. Then I'll go with you. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. The next day, she borrowed a ledger from the school and started writing down legal terms, court instructions, and names she remembered from the custody hearing. She didn't ask Jacob for help, but when she paused to rest her eyes, he slid a rolled-up map toward her. This is the county line, he said, and this is where your husband's property is. If it hasn't changed. You've been there, she asked. I drove cattle through years ago. I remember the place. A big white house, 2 gables. The fence was new back then. Her mouth tightened. That's the one. He watched her for a moment, then said, You'll need a place to stay when we get there. You won't sleep under his roof. You won't have to. She looked up. Did you already plan this? I don't like to leave things to chance. She slowly closed the ledger. Are you always this way? I've seen what happens when people aren't. The next week was a blur of preparations. She worked at the school in the mornings, and in the afternoons, she wrote letters to anyone who could vouch for her. Miss Cartwright wrote a character statement. Doctor Keller agreed to send a note with them confirming her injuries and recovery. On the last evening before their departure, Adeline sat on the porch of the feed store. Do you ever think, she asked, how strange it is that you found me at all? Jacob leaned against the porch post. I think about it more than I say. She turned her face toward the street. If you hadn't been there. I was, he said, cutting her off, his voice quiet but firm. She was silent for a long time. I don't know what to do when I have them back. I don't have land. I don't even have my own horse. You'll have what you need, he said. I can't ask you to carry all this. You didn't ask, he said, stepping down from the porch and walking toward the stable. You just gave me half of it without even realizing it. She got up and followed him without a word. The cool air in the stable smelled of leather and hay. His mare was already saddled, and next to her stood a smaller roan gelding, its coat brushed to a soft sheen. A riding skirt and coat were folded on the saddle bench. That's not mine, she said, looking at the gear. It is now, Jacob said. I figured you'd want to ride your own horseback. Her hands tightened at her sides, but she didn't speak. He walked to the door. We leave at first light. She stood there for a while, one hand resting on the horse's withers, her throat too thick to speak. That night she didn't sleep much. The wind howled against the shutters, and from the saloon late voices spilled into the dust. She lay still, eyes open, thinking of Willa's small hand in hers, of Weston's laugh when he ran too fast and tripped. At dawn she was waiting outside when Jacob rode up. Are you ready? He asked. She mounted without answering. They rode east, the sun rising behind them, casting their long shadows across the prairie. She didn't look back. They rode through the lowlands. By the second day the land flattened into wide stretches of brittle grass and scattered cottonwoods. Adeline's thighs ached, but she said nothing. Jacob kept pace beside her, never rushing, never slowing unless she did first. By the third morning dust clung to their clothes like a second skin. That night they camped near a dry ravine. Jacob handed her a tin plate and sat across from her. I thought I'd be more afraid, she said. Why aren't you? He asked. Because this time I'm not alone. Jacob didn't answer. He folded his arms on his knees and watched the flames. The silence between them was no longer empty. Have you ever thought about leaving Montana? She asked. I did once, he said. After my father died, I thought I'd head south, maybe to San Antonio. But I couldn't leave my mother alone. And then the herd grew and the land got into my bones. Do you still have family here? Just my mother. She remarried last spring and moved north to live with my aunt. She said she was tired of watching the same sun rise over the same hills. Adeline pulled her knees up, hugging them. I've never had a place that felt like my own. Just rooms I passed through. You will, he said. She looked at him. Do you mean that I wouldn't say it if I didn't? The wind shifted, carrying the dry scent of mesquite. She watched him for a long moment, then took out a folded cloth. She handed it to him without a word. He carefully unfolded it. Inside was a faded ribbon, once pink, now almost white. Willa wore that on the day I took them, she said. She dropped it in the wagon, and I didn't realize I had kept it until weeks later. Jacob placed the ribbon in his palm, then carefully folded it and handed it back to her. You'll put it in her hair again. She didn't speak. She tucked it away and lay down, her eyes open to the stars. They arrived in Kansas City 2 days later. The town had grown into a sprawl of wood and brick, the streets noisy with wagons and trains. Adeline kept her hat pulled low, her coat buttoned. She walked beside Jacob, her shoulders squared without once reaching for his arm. They rented a room with 2 cots and a basin of clean water. She stood by the window. The courthouse is 4 blocks away. We'll go there first thing. She turned to him. I don't want you in the room unless they ask. Jacob nodded. I'll wait outside. It's not because I don't want you there. I know. Then why aren't you arguing? Because you've already decided. She gave a short breath, something like a laugh, and sat on the edge of the cot. It's strange. I thought if I ever came back here I would feel like I was drowning. But right now I just feel ready. Jacob leaned against the wall. You've already done the hardest part, which is surviving it. The next morning she wore the same riding skirt but pinned her hair back tighter. She didn't speak as they walked to the courthouse. He waited on the steps as she walked up them alone, her back straight, her hands steady. It was almost noon when the door opened. She stepped outside, blinking against the light, and walked straight to him. Her face was unreadable. They agreed to reopen my petition, she said. I have to prove that I can support them, show that I have a home, an income, a stable place. The judge said, I'll need an affidavit from the person I live with, someone who can speak to your character, your work. Jacob met her eyes. Then I'll give it. She pressed her lips together. It will tie your name to mine. In writing. I don't care about names, she said. They will send someone to verify everything. I have a month to prepare, then we'd better get home before fall. Home, she said softly. He reached out, not touching her but close. That place I told you about. The one near the stream. It needs someone who knows how to start over. She smiled then, not widely but enough to show warmth. That someone might be me. They didn't speak again until they stood at the edge of the rail yard, their horses saddled, dust rising around them. Adeline turned to Jacob, her voice low. I want them to grow up knowing what it means to be safe, to be loved without a cost. He met her gaze. Then let's build them a life where that's all they'll ever know. She nodded once, climbed into the saddle, and didn't look back as they rode west. Not because she was afraid, but because everything she needed was already riding beside her. They returned to Montana in late August when the shadows stretched longer and the heat began to loosen its grip on the land. The journey back was quiet, not from weariness, but from something settled between them, a quiet certainty that didn't need words. As they crested the ridge overlooking the valley, Adeline slowed her horse and looked down at the plot of land nestled between the cottonwoods and the creek. The roof of the old cabin was dotted with rust, but the porch was still standing, and the barn leaned steady against the wind. Is this it? She asked, her voice low. It'll need work, he said. The roof leaks in 2 places. The fence along the northern edge is soft. She turned to him. Are we buying it or borrowing it? It's yours. The deed was transferred last week. I put it in your name. She blinked once her lips parted. Why? Because you can't build something real on someone else's land. Jacob, that's not. I know it's more than you asked for, he gently interrupted, but it's not more than you deserve. She quickly looked away, then back at the cabin. I don't know how to repay something like that. You don't, he said. You just live in it. They spent the next weeks fixing up the place. She sanded the raw boards of the porch while he patched the roof and mended the barn doors. Miss Cartwright sent over a small stove. Dr. Keller stopped by with a parcel of dried herbs and a worn quilt his sister had left behind. Each evening they sat on the front steps and watched the sky darken over the ridge. Some nights they talked, other nights they didn't. But he always handed her a cup of hot chicory, and she always drank it slowly, her fingers brushing his when she gave it back. One afternoon, just before the first frost, a letter arrived. Adeline stood under the eaves with the envelope in her hand. Jacob stepped down from the ladder. Is it from Kansas? She nodded, then opened it. Her eyes scanned the page, her mouth a hard line that softened as she read. When she looked up, her voice was steady. The court ruled in my favor. The children are being escorted by a matron. They'll arrive next week. Jacob didn't ask if she was ready. He only said, we'll ride to meet them. The train pulled in under a heavy gray sky. Adeline stood stiffly beside Jacob, her hands clutched. When the door opened and a thin woman stepped down guiding 2 children, Adeline didn't move at first. Willa looked smaller than she remembered, her hair cut shorter, a patch sewn into the hem of her dress. Weston clung to the matron's skirt, his eyes wide and uncertain. Then Willa's gaze lifted and met hers. One breath, then another. Mama Adeline dropped her gloves, her knees hitting the platform as she opened her arms. Willa ran first, her face crumpling as she crashed into her mother's chest. Weston followed, a heartbeat later, stumbling into her arms. She held them tight, her shoulders shaking, one hand tangled in Willa's hair. "I'm here," she whispered over and over. "I'm here. I'm here." The matron stepped back with a nod to Jacob, who tipped his hat in silent thanks. They rode home in the wagon Jacob had borrowed. Willa sat next to Adeline, her head resting on her mother's arm. Weston dozed in her lap, one hand curled in her shawl. When they reached the cabin, Jacob gently lifted Weston and carried him inside. Adeline followed with Willa, showing her where the stove was, where her quilt was folded, where the light was warmest in the corner of the room. That night she tucked them into the small bed, kissing their foreheads with a hand that no longer shook. When she stepped onto the porch, Jacob was waiting, his arms loosely folded, his eyes on the stars. She stopped in front of him. "I don't know what to call what you've given me." He looked at her, the lantern light catching the lines beside his mouth. "Don't call it anything. Just live it." She reached for his hand. "I want you to stay." "I was hoping you'd say that," he said, his voice low. She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "I don't just want a roof or a field or a fence that holds. I want you beside me when I wake up. I want something that doesn't fade when the hard seasons come." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "Then that's what we'll build." They didn't kiss right away. They stood pressed close, the moment stretching between them like warm breath. When she finally rose on her toes and touched her mouth to his, it was quiet, sure, and lasting. The morning after the first snow, Willa stood barefoot on the porch, watching the sun rise over the hills. Adeline wrapped her arms around her daughter, resting her chin on her shoulder. Inside, Jacob stirred the fire with Weston half asleep in his lap. The cabin smelled of cedar and ash, and something sweet rising from the pot on the stove. Outside, the land was still but not silent, the creek moving beneath its icy skin, birds shifting in the bare branches. Adeline turned to the door and looked back once at the land. That was now theirs. Not borrowed, not promised, simply theirs. Then she stepped inside, into the warmth, into the life they had built together. The story of Jacob and Adeline reminds us that true strength is not always shown through grand gestures, but often through persistence, patience, and the quiet kindness we offer each other every day. In life, everyone faces moments of collapse, carrying wounds both seen and unseen, but sometimes all it takes is a hand extended at the right moment, a heart willing to listen and protect, to help someone find the trust they thought was lost. Love does not require elaborate promises. It is built through steady presence, through standing together through the harsh winters of life. For older generations, this story is also a gentle reminder that happiness and new beginnings are not limited by age. No matter how much loss we have endured, we can still open our hearts to love and create a home, not only made of wood and stone, but filled with peace and trust. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give is unconditional companionship, letting the one beside us know they will never have to face the hardest days alone. Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget.